Day, which is tomorrow for all of you folks in the United States. Do Canadians celebrate Labor Day?
Every day is Labor Day in Canada.
Oh, hey everyone. I'm at Doc Foreman, and you've made it to hashtag SPSM. If you didn't know that, surprise! But hopefully you know what you're here for. This is an hour where we talk about suicide prevention and social media, and we're really excited about tonight. Like many of our shows, it sort of starts with, and then I met this amazing person, but that's exactly what happened tonight. This was one of those situations where we were at the National Council, their conference, and I got to meet someone who had an amazing podcasting setup and who was just fabulous to work with. And I was like, you have to come on the show and you have to sort of explain what your how your setup works and how you do this. Cannot wait to introduce you to Kris Walker. Not only is she an amazing professional and an amazing content creator and also sort of content archetype, architect. Sort of. She's really good. She also has a fabulous story and a dog. So it's pretty much all things perfect. This is it pretty much is. And it is Labor Day weekend, so you've got that 3-day weekend. You are, I know, looking for the next thing to watch and podcast because Game of Thrones, season cliffhanger. Netflix hasn't released anything good lately. And you're looking for something to listen to while you're mowing the lawn. You know that you do it. And we're going to be talking to you about not only some great content that Kris's channel produces, but also maybe you thought you would like to make a podcast. And we actually have members of our community talking about that. She's really going to discuss how that works and even some of the business aspects behind that. And so before we get into it, we're going to introduce you to all the folks who are with us. Mr. Tony Wood, say hi to the people.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tony Wood. I'm the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, suicidology.org. Joined today, I'm also the COO of Quantify, a company dedicated to the intersection of computer science and mental health. Quantify.com. Donate your data for mental health research at ourdatahelps.org. Bart Andrews.
Hey, Tony Wood. A mighty Labor Day Eve to everybody out in the SPSM community. I'm excited about this show for many different reasons, but one of the things that I've learned in my short time on SPSM is how important media is, and being skilled at how you use the media makes the biggest difference in how effective you are. And I got to listen to Kristen interview the amazing Doc Foreman on a podcast that did it at National Council. And it was really cool because it was kind of an origin story, because April is kind of a hero for me. So it's true. But the interview was so well done. It was such a powerful, powerful podcast. And because of SPSM and folks like Kris Maxwell, I'm now addicted to podcasts. And you can really tell the difference in the quality of podcasts. Not all podcasts are created equally. And I think one of the things I'm hoping to hear about, what are the things that if you're thinking about doing a podcast or being a part of a podcast, what are those things that make a difference that we need to be focused on so that we're effective? And so I'm really pleased about Kristen being here and sharing her expertise with us, because this is really important because podcasts are huge.
And I want to, before we get to introducing our guest, we want for Kris Maxwell to come on and introduce himself. And Kris is really responsible for subverting all the rest of us and getting us way more hooked on podcasts. So Kris Maxwell is sort of our podcast pusher, which is true all summer. Kris, say hi. Maxwell.
Hey everybody, I'm Kris Maxwell. I'm coordinator of member engagement for the largest suicide prevention organization in the country. I'm also a co-chair for the Strategic Media Response Task Force for the American Association of Suicidology. What I do every day is look for engaging content and try to push it out and disseminate it to the people who are going to benefit from it the most. And so obviously we've talked about podcasts before. I think what intrigues me the most about Kristen's work is the effort to not only make this engaging, but also make it accessible to people who want to put this content out. So I'm super excited to hear about this, and thank you, Kristen, for jumping on with us.
So Kristen has Kris Walker we're at NatCon, and Alicia, if you're out there, says we've got the most amazing people here. It's everything EHR, who I'd heard about on Twitter before. She's like, they have this whole podcast set up. You tell them that I sent you. They're totally like doing podcasts. And she manages, I think it was like 40 minutes total, and she has a wonderful sort of system. Not only did she have a great system, she had a lovely way of being, a wonderful character, great staff, and speaking of origin stories, a great origin story of her own. Kris, introduce yourself.
Hey everybody. Well, yeah, we have a good gig going, and it's born of knowing not what we do. So, we can't make any mistakes because we don't know what we're doing anyway. And somehow I think because of the goodwill of just pumping out as much information as we can, supporting mental health, puts us in rarefied air to where we look like we know what we're doing. And that's what makes it work.
So explain a little bit more about what you mean by that. And I'm sure probably our audience does know, like the immediate members of our community, but why is it that in mental health, like even sort of an entry level of competence in social media, like looks so impressive sometimes? Explain how that works.
Well, there's so much fear around social media when it comes to anything to do with the medical profession, but especially mental health, confidentiality laws and stigma around those two words, mental health, is just rampant. So I know that it's there, but I'm in this bubble of mental health love, so I forget that the rest of the world outside of the bubble really does have stigma. So when I step out of that world and I go, oh, wow, yeah, people are afraid of those two words, it's a good reminder again that we have to keep doing these shows. We have to have interesting guests. We have to have interesting podcasters that will talk about all facets of mental health so that we can make this mainstream conversation.
It's amazing to me that we aren't leveraging the fact that it's stigmatized to our advantage. There's so much media that becomes so popular that is, talking about taboo subjects in sort of very thrilling ways. And I got into mental health because a lot of it is like really compelling, like stories about and that are impacting people. Just as compelling as watching like Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones or whatever. I mean, really compelling stories. But there's something about like the people who have experience with mental health, either they have lived experience or they're, or both, they're an expert or a professional. There's something about that they think confidentiality about an individual person's treatment expands to all of mental health. Like it's all confidential. We can't talk about it. Like mental health is Fight Club. Have you ever run into that where people aren't sure that they can talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, even in the industry, there's such how do I talk about a counselor as an example? How do I talk about the things that I've heard from my clients without outing my clients? And where's the line between that? That's why we have a great attorney that we're constantly checking with. She's going to do her own show on our network called Law and Disorder. It's about character disorders and mental health and the law. So she breaks it down for our listeners. Megan Lyons, she's awesome, on what you can talk about, what you can get away with, what you can't, not to shame anyone, because the whole point is to eradicate the stigma so you don't have shame involved, but you have to share these stories because, listen, my listeners know more about my life than they would ever want to know. In fact, I think I just got an excellent review that said, I love all the shows where Kristen interviews celebrities, athletes, her neighbor, whatever. My favorite shows are the ones where she talks about her own life, and I find her extremely annoying, but I learned something about the human condition every time. And I thought, was that really a compliment? I'm annoying. I
like to say twice, that means you're engaging.
Exactly. I'd like to change the letters of that word, but it's out there on iTunes. I can't remove that review, but whatever. I mean, we are annoying. I do 4 to 5 shows a week. Of course, people are going to get annoyed. My editor is paid so well. Not really. We pay her. She deserves way more money than we pay her, but she listens to me like way too much. And the point is, this is the human experience. And I do have an interesting story. My family, generations of mental illness throughout my family. It's been a hard struggle. And the point is to say, hey, I'm human. I have wanted to commit suicide. I have attempted. I have been severely depressed for years. I'm not anymore. And it's okay to talk about those things and be engaging and to use it as a tool to bring that out in other people so that they feel comfortable sharing their stories as well.
So how did you move to someone who was really, really impacted and really impaired by mental health and suffering, mental illness and suffering, to someone who is managing it? I think you have a friend with you right now who's managing it and producing all these shows and having
camera. Buddy, no one wants to see my chest, but they do want to see, Buddy, come here. Buddy, come here. Come here. Come here. Okay, can everyone get a glimpse of Buddy? There he is. There he is. Well, I started speaking about childhood sexual abuse when I was 15. It's something that I experienced with my biological father. And even without that early childhood trauma, because depression and other, mental illness, anxiety, and so on runs rampant in my family, I likely would have become someone that suffered from depression anyway. But that childhood trauma was like throwing, gasoline onto an already, slow burning fire. So, but I always had this need to speak up, speak out. It was part of my healing process. And be the one that, okay, we're in a room and I'm a teen peer support person and everyone in the room won't speak up, and I'll be the one that says, hey, here's my story. And then that opens up everyone else. So that didn't stop me from still being depressed and still having PTSD and things like that. But it did help me work through my issues, continue to go to therapy, and benefit from the amazing people that choose to be counselors. And that's really how my desire to do a podcast came about. I wanted it to be a love letter and a thank you for all of the behavioral health counselors out there that helped me on my journey.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I would love for Kris Maxwell to comment on some of this. I mean, this is a person, and Bart, you're a person who also understands the idea of bridging the gap between lived experience and being like a professional expert and a contributor to the recovery movement. I wish that more people would say, I have this history and I have these incredibly valuable skills. And we've asked you for your story first, but we're not asking you on here because of your lived experience. That's just ends up being the bonus. We're asking you here because you turned all of that into a contribution. And Kris Maxwell, of course, knows quite a bit about the importance of being able to tell stories with your constituency. Could you describe for us, Kris, a little bit about how you move from everything EHR into mental health news radio, like this sort of business end of it?
Yeah, I started everything EHR because I noticed that all the volunteer work that I was doing in behavioral health, which involves furry creatures like my therapy dog, Buddy, and I also have another one called Miles. I couldn't, let me back up a little bit. I could not function in school, in traditional school. That just was not a place for me, but I could function really well working, a workaholic. There's a reason why border collies and I are soulmates, just workaholic. So I found a different way into behavioral health where I didn't have to have the education, and that was to have therapy dogs. And then I'm allowed into hospitals and therapy rooms and group therapy sessions and lockdown centers and psych wards because of the dog. So I noticed that the therapists were ripping their hair out trying to be a therapist and emote or pull back or do their job, and really just not be able to do it well because they have no platform that's easy to use, that's an electronic health record where your medical records are. So I thought, well, okay, I know technology really well, 20 years as a consultant in the business field. I'll sideways move into the electronic health record market for behavioral health and help them. So I came up with everything EHR so that I could help behavioral health agencies find good electronic health record software companies, because there are quite a few of them that are horrible. So that became my specialty. Yeah, exactly. That became my specialty. And then out of that became, I want to do a podcast. And what started it was funny. I was asked to be on another podcast, someone else's, to talk about all the ways that salespeople and electronic health record companies train their salespeople to do a shady, not real demo of their products to sell something that isn't going to help anyone. And that podcast went through the roof, and I continued to be a guest, and we decided that, you know what, this is something I should do, and I want to make it all about mental health. So that's where Mental Health News Radio grew from.
Can you tell everybody what Mental Health News Radio is? I know that we tweeted out like some podcasts that people can listen to, but explain what this is.
Sure. It's a podcast I've been doing on my own for about 4 years now. And I interview everyone from my mailman who has bipolar disorder, to celebrities, to therapists, to best-selling authors all over the world. In fact, we're downloaded now in over 170 countries. I never expected anyone but my brother or my brothers and my mom to listen. And then somehow it just grew into this, amazing platform. And 450 shows later, we became a network that has about 15 other podcasters on our network that cover everything from addiction to spirituality to first responders to technology and mental health. Everything is mental health related, but it's even sports and mental health. So it's a platform now to have more people come in, because I can't do it all and no one wants me to do it all. So they can come in and talk, do what I do in their own unique way. And we really cover every facet of mental health.
So I'm going to check in with Kris Maxwell. So Kris is my podcast junkie. Kris, can you tell us a little bit about why you think that Maxwell, can you explain why you think Kris Walker's news radio has been so successful?
Well, I think one of the things that we kind of brought up in the pre-show, Kris had mentioned that, that there's a certain way that you have to do things to make it engaging to each individual audience. And that goes down to the very name of the podcast. It probably involves a lot to do with the description that's in there and which guests you get in there. And so having some of these, having some of the history that you have, Kris, and the knowledge and wisdom that you've gained from your recovery process, but also from the way that you've worked with other people in this field, you've come to clearly understand like what makes things engaging and what people are going to want to listen to. A lot of people that you could be really great at podcasting or hosting a show, but if you aren't speaking to your audience in the same language that they aren't going to know. That's just not going to be interesting. And so I think that's what I find so amazing about the idea of creating this network, is that not only do you speak their language, you speak everybody's language, but you've now provided each individual platform to basically host a polyglot network, right? Like everybody is speaking different languages, but they're all listening at the same time. And I think it's amazing and fantastic, but you have to have that piece, I think, to make it successful, and you've done that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be an engaging person yourself, and I'm an extroverted introvert. So the idea of, even though right now I'm wearing cool Wonder Woman pajama bottoms that no one can see, I don't do anything on camera except for something like this, because I like that layer that affords emotional depth sometimes that you can get on a phone or with a podcast, that I can get into a subject like suicide or schizophrenia or child abuse, those kind of things that someone that's on camera or live just can't get to. And because I've been in so much therapy myself, I mean, one of my therapists is one of the editors of the largest Jungian publishing house in the world. So, I've had amazing therapists too. And not only I started at such a young age, 12, of course, that was going to affect my development and my skills as a listener and my skills as someone who knows when to speak and when not to, and how to tap into someone else's emotions. So all of those things that I learned at such a young age helped me be a good interviewer, or at least a decent one anyway. And I put those to use in a very loving way to try to pull out as much as I can from someone in a safe environment. Like we had one of the Cosby survivors came on our show. And one of the things she said was she trusted that she knew we would edit what she wanted edited out. She knew that it was going to be safe, and she knew that I wasn't going to sensationalize. And that made me feel so good. You couldn't pay me. And of course we don't get paid to do interviews, but that made me feel so good as a human being that's what, continues to drive what we do. And anyone that comes in that wants to be part of our network, they don't last long if they aren't at that same wavelength we are, where it's more about the advocacy than it is about, stardom or putting your name out there. Does that make sense?
I think Kris is on mute, but absolutely it makes sense. And, we have a question from the Twitterverse that, by the way, Linthicum, I'm going to mess it up, but he said, curious how many unique listens you get per month, and wants to know what makes a show popular, easy, and worthwhile to listen to.
Well, it's per month. That would be hard for me to quantify off the top of my head, but I could tweet that out later. Interestingly enough, if we podcast about anything to do with personality disorders like narcissistic personality disorder or sociopathy or psychopathy, we can get 18,000 people listening to that particular show.
Wow.
So that is a hot, hot, hot topic. Our shows, we do shows within shows. So even though I interview everyone, we have weekly shows. One of them is called Empowered Empaths. Another one is a roundtable discussion with a psychiatrist named Dr. Paul Meyer. The show that we're doing with our attorney, Megan Lyons, Law and Disorder. Those particular shows are regular shows with a regular title on our network, and those garner the most downloads. I think because our listeners get to know the same people come on every time. Listeners get to know our personalities, and we may be annoying, but they want to hear our stories. They want to hear what's going on in our lives, see how we handle challenges, and be a part of that. It feels like a family that they're a part of every week.
We wouldn't know anything about family and community in SPSM. 18,000 views, like when you talk about psychopathy. So, I think that's what you're really saying what I was saying, which is that a lot about mental health and mental illness, where there are these behaviors that really capture people's attention and people want to understand. My experience is people actually do want to understand, and it's often not professionals or people with expertise who are explaining what's happening. So either someone who has lived it, or someone who that's their whole profession, or someone who is in both categories, explaining what's going on in a way that it's very, very accessible. What we do is we leave it to Dateline or I'm sure Dateline, you're wonderful, but
that's
right. You're totally Emmys, right? But often we're sort of complaining that the media doesn't explain things well or portray things right. And I'm like, these are really compelling topics and people do want information. I wonder why we aren't giving it to them,
Well, there's nothing like, I think I'll just use the shows that we do about, psychopathy as an example. Yes, we have experts come on that, treat people that are psychopaths, but we mostly have survivors of emotional and psychological abuse come on, and That is what people resonate with. What have you been through? What emotional trauma have you suffered? What depression, how has it affected your mental health to be involved with someone who is sadistically, emotionally terrorizing you? That is why those shows, you know, get so many downloads, because people can completely, you know, who hasn't been part of that kind of an experience, either loosely or it's part of their family or married to someone like that, or a girlfriend or a boyfriend. That's why those shows people resonate with so well.
So, I mean, what you're saying is that people are like, you know, we talk about the idea that mental illness doesn't just usually affect the person who has it, affects everybody who's sort of connected to them, right? Like it doesn't just hurt one person. And so you're telling me that people are like, so this is what it's like. So either what it's like to have the thing or to be right next to it, and that it's hard to understand, and you want to have somebody who can explain it and you can connect with it when it's hard for you to explain yourself, like to yourself.
Absolutely.
Amber Cannon, who is one of our regular members of our community, also was wondering if you had episodes about borderline personality disorder.
You know, it's fascinating because some of my friends have this diagnosis, and boy, they get a bad rap. They get lumped in with other cluster Bs, and that's so not fair. So I haven't done shows on it yet, but I'm going to, because it's something that fascinates me as well. You know, so yes, we're going to start doing that.
Speaking of folks who would really like to talk about like misconceptions about borderline personality disorder, what it's really like to have it, like, no, you've totally got to do this. I can't wait. I'm sorry. Like, that's such a really important issue to me, because I care about people who have this disorder, because I help people recover. That would be totally awesome, Kris. Like that, I'm putting in my order for that.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do that for a while. And what's interesting is a lot of, especially in the addiction field, I got so many doors kind of politely, because who's going to say no to the mental health news radio lady, but politely slammed in my face from talking about things like narcissism or sociopathy or psychopathy, because addictive behavior can mirror some of that behavior when someone is active in their addiction. So a lot of counseling centers, treatment centers, and so on really didn't want to talk about that. And I found that utterly fascinating. So, but what they would not talk about is borderline. And so we just couldn't get anyone to open up about it. And now I'm on a mission. Like, I am going to talk about that. So we are interviewing counselors, specialists, and so on now to see who would be, you know, a good fit to come on and specifically focus on that.
Have I got a deal for you? No, I mean, folks with borderline personality disorder die by suicide anywhere from 3 to 10% mortality rate. Like, it's the highest mortality rate of mental health. It is agonist emotional suffering. It really is.
Yes.
And it's so much so that people die sometimes, and very, very poorly understood by many people, including clinicians. And
yes,
many times the people who have it like, oh, you totally have to do that. Also because it's one of those disorders from which you can recover. Like, when I talk to people that, like, everyone wants to, like, I don't know, wants is the wrong word, but bipolar is a diagnosis everyone's familiar with. And when I'm like, well, bipolar disorder is something you'll likely have all your life and have to manage, a lot like type 1 diabetes, but borderline personality disorder is something that you can recover from and get better and have less medication and can like get well, and like, it's totally the one you want to have. But like, not that you want to have anyone, but it's one that it's one you can get better. But it's interesting to me that even like clinicians who should know what the risk of dying is if you don't get treatment, and what your outcomes, like 80% of people who get effective treatment are much better in a year. Like, there's so much room for hope and so much risk if it's not understood and treated well. Like, it's totally a sweet topic to talk about.
Absolutely. And, you know, the other side of that too is there are a lot of victims of psychological abuse at the hands of people that have narcissistic personality disorder, sociopathy, and psychopathy that are so traumatized and in so much pain, anxiety, and PTSD from these relationships that when they go to get help, they have been so gaslighted that they are given, boom, a diagnosis of borderline when they do not. They should not have been given that diagnosis. They should be given a diagnosis of CPTSD, anxiety disorder, and so on. So not only is, are people that actually have this diagnosis being marginalized and thrown out, they're unhelpable and unhealable, but then it's being given as a diagnosis to people that shouldn't really have that diagnosis. So across the board, it's this sort of analogous fog. Did I just make up a word? I think I just made up a word. But anyway,
don't even get me started on like shitty diagnostics. But Bart's going to comment. Bart's going to comment because this is something Bart and I we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I have so much to say about this, and we have so little time. One, Kris, the things that you're getting at that are really powerful to me is, one, that your personal experience is directly connected to your mission and the work that you do. And my personal experience with that, and I have a lot of anecdotal support for this, is that most of us in the helping profession are driven by our own personal experiences, but that in professional settings, we actually get coached to not acknowledge these personal experiences that we had, and that's what's driving our mission. In fact, that often gets beaten out of us in the training process. It certainly happened to me, both in the application and in the graduate school process and in the training process. And I think having someone like you that is so skilled, has so much expertise, and is doing so much, come out and tell your story is incredibly powerful. We need more folks to do that. The other thing that I find really interesting, I just read a book called the Psychopathy Test, that really that's absolutely an incredible book that explores our fascination with antisocial personality disorder. And there's lots of interesting things that are in this, and it connects to what you're talking about, in that people are fascinated with mental illness, mental conditions in other people, right? And there's this zone, this safe spot where they're fascinated, and when you cross over that safe spot, they're no longer interested. For instance, once it's clear that someone's having severe psychosis, someone's in a severe manic state, they lose interest. They really gravitate to stories where the person is off, but not so off that they can't relate to them a little bit, right? So it's like this just crazy enough, and I know that's really inappropriate language, but that's kind of the concept, right? And the author does this great examination of this guy in England who is talking about how the subway bombings in England in 2006 were staged. They're not real. He gets all this media attention. A few years later, he comes out and he says, by the way, God is talking to me, and that's how I know this. Completely drops off the radar. Nobody is interested in him anymore. So when he just had this little bit of eccentricity, right, that was fascinating to people. But once they cross over a certain level, all of a sudden people aren't interested anymore. And that, I think that really
scares people.
It scares people. They can't relate to it too. There's this one of the things, people are fascinated in mental health for some reasons that aren't great. And one of the things that the author points out is that I want to learn about people that lives are worse than mine. Right? So it's a way that people can kind of feel better about their own. I know I've got some challenges, right? And if I can hear about these other folks, oh, I'm not so bad anymore. And I think podcasts like your podcast and the stories that you're telling create a humanity and normalize this and generalize out to everyone. There's a resonance there. So no longer is it voyeuristic. Right? It's sharing and it's connecting. And I think there's a really big difference between how we portray people who are fighting mental conditions, and when we do it in a way that is caring and respectful, we create understanding and not just entertainment. Not that it shouldn't be entertaining, it should be, right? But I think that's one of the things that you're doing really well. And don't get me started on personality disorders, because if we could just get rid of the whole concept of personality disorder, I'd be a pretty happy camper, because the folks that came up with that stuff, you'd be interested to hear the story about how the concept personality disorders came up and the complete and utter lack of really good science behind the way we came up with that term. Yeah, I know April doesn't like science. We're moving on, everybody.
Uh, don't get me started on trying to explain to people that like the way that you do diagnosis of mental health is different than other parts of medicine, and it's complicated and difficult. But Kris, we have a question for you, which is, do you do any podcasts about youth?
Yes, absolutely. We have Beyond Risk and Back by an amazing gentleman by the name of Aaron Huey, and he just started on our podcast network. That is all he does is talk about youth, mental health, substance abuse issues, and getting your children back. So I have done many shows on that myself on my own podcast, but Aaron is really the expert.
This is what I really love about your network, which is that you have so many voices. So what I particularly enjoy is not just that you're interviewing people just to tell some first-person stories, but you're also having all these different subject matter experts who are doing really, really specifically focused content. One of the things that we had intended to ask you about, and I want to make sure that and we're already 35 minutes in, which is like this hour just flies, is for you to explain a little bit about, I know we always seem to get, I always plan about 4 major sort of portions, and we always seem to get like 2 or 3 in, but I just don't, I want to make sure we don't get past that. There's a real strategy to how you help people edit the content, how you title things, how you do media around things. That's why you have a lot of listeners. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how that works. I mean, you don't have to give away the cow, but give us a little milk.
I'm so not concerned. Listen, if I had a huge ego, I would only have my podcast be, the one, and I'm the only host, and I'm such a sharer of the spotlight. I don't even want to be in the spotlight. I just have a big mouth. So I want other people's voice. I've told every podcaster, please do it better than me. I want you to have better numbers than I do. If you can learn from our mistakes, our mishaps, go, go, go. You sis, boom, ba, rah, rah, this is all for the team. So I think that is part of what makes us do well. Is also there are people that have a successful podcast already that have decided to come be a part of our network. And the first thing they say is, Kristen, we just want to be part of the family. And I think, oh my gosh, okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. So I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. So, but in terms of the business side, I do have a business cap on, and part of my depression and getting through all the things that I went through as a kid was my coping mechanism was work. So I'm 47 and I started working full time when I was 15. So you've got a pretty obsessed business noggin on top of, what we're putting out there. So of course, that's going to lend a hand in terms of how we build something. So there are things like how you title your show so that you are getting as much traction as possible. So thinking about things like, how is that show title going to show up in a Google search? How is it going to show up in terms of a book that someone has written? The words that you use to put into a title are extremely important, and people miss that when they're titling something as simple as titling a show. If someone wrote a book, name it the name of the book and put the author's name in there. Or as an example, we interviewed a hockey player who suffered traumatic brain injury and major anxiety and depression and suicide attempts. So we titled the show Skating on Thin Ice, an interview with an NHL hockey player, and then his name. Is that a long title? Yes, but you know what? if you Google that, that show comes right up. So just taking into account the business behind Google, that it is a content monster. I always tell everyone it's the cookie monster, but take the word cookie and put content. So those things come into play, how you describe your shows, and then also peppering in real, well, I don't say real person, that's celebrities are real people too. So high profile people mixed in with everyday people like me, so that anybody that comes on that has a larger audience that they're taking the show they did with us and blasting it out to their social media. It's going to shine a spotlight on all those shows where we had someone that has 3 lists, the 3, you know, people following them on social media. It gives everybody a voice. So marketing to that is, and being very strategic how you do it. So don't do 10 shows with regular quote unquote people. Do 5 shows and then 5 shows with bigger name guests and mix them in together so that you're constantly getting a feed of up low, up low, up low when it comes to bringing in listeners to your show. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfectly good sense. Variability in producing media is absolutely vital, right? If you're hitting the same note all the times, people won't pay attention and you won't get as much traction. There was actually this really interesting thing, I don't know if you saw this or not, about what makes pop music popular. And they came out, there's this term called a harmonic twist or a harmonic surprise. And so people like things that they're not expecting. And that's one of the things that you're creating in this variability where people don't always know what to expect. And that variability keeps people engaged. It's how you create relationships with people.
Absolutely. Another thing that I'll throw out there, and I think some podcasters don't like this, especially people that wouldn't fit on our network necessarily, that they already are a best-selling author or they're a, you know, sort of a pseudo celebrity and they're really after that celebrity status and they think a podcast is going to get them there. We all work our tails off. So someone like that can come in and want to be part of our network and rah. But when I tell them, look, if you want your show to do well, you need to get your rear end out there and go to conferences for free and podcast from those conferences. And you're going to be working like a dog at these conferences, interviewing people 8 hours. You have no voice. At the end of the night, people want to take you to dinner and you're like, my wittiness ran out 5 hours ago. I got nothing to say, but you go to dinner anyway and you crawl on the floor and you plug in your equipment. That's what it takes. If you're an advocate and if you're just in this for celebrity or to talk your book, there's nothing wrong with that. But podcasting isn't for you. You're not going to grow your podcast if you don't get it out there.
So, Kris, one of the things that's really powerful about this to me is you've really hit on the formula, and April has done this so well. It's not about promoting yourself. It's about promoting other people. Right?
Yes.
Tell me what it is. What are things that folks can do so that they make sure that they're staying on point on that issue? Because some self-promotion is great, but when we're out telling other people's stories, we get so much more traction, right? How do you do that? What are some tips around that?
Oh my gosh, go to therapy and learn how to get rid of your ego. Seriously.
Oh no! In the mental health community, that would thin the herd pretty quickly. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't really know. What, April? Comments?
First of all, I put myself on mute. It's Labor Day. We're having a house party. I admit I'm a little social. But one of the things, I know, totally. So
new drinking game. Every time April mentions a house party, everybody takes a drink.
No,
we started this earlier, and most of us are finished. Go ahead, proceed.
So, I got to see Kris in action, and Kris is telling you this, and she's not kidding. So she shows up, and she sets up her equipment, and she's got, first of all, there's something to be said for volume. There's something to be said for practice, where she is, she brings people in, and she knows how to get people to tell their story. She has done it enough times that she sort of has a very quick sensibility. She has another person listening. She had a couple people, like a little crew, which a lot like SPSM. Like we, I just can't say enough for the fact that this is there's just a bunch of people who sort of volunteer and do their bit really well. And that's how she shows up at that conference and is able to roll out all of that content really quickly. She does a tremendous job. About the ego thing, nobody, if you're not Brad Pitt, nobody's going to listen to, most Brad of us Pitt. Aren't that, you know what I'm saying? I know.
You're Brad Pitt.
Listen, Yo quiero. But no. If you're not somebody like that, like people aren't going to like watch 20 videos of that. Everybody else was wanting to connect, and they really do want to know about people. I think that's what podcast is interesting. Like when you and Maxwell may speak to this, like why you listen to the Dollop is not, although the hosts are entertaining, it's that they understand how to help you connect with the thing that they're talking about. And I think Kris has an amazing sensibility when I've watched her do this, of understanding the parts of someone's story that people are going to connect with here, and then she adds just a little bit here. And she has a very lovely touch when she does it, and this is why she's here today. I just had an amazing time with her.
Thank you. I will say this, another thing that podcasters can do if you're going to have a podcast that is about the human experience, whatever that may be. It could be that you're a cliff diver, but you talk about how scared you are all the way down, whatever your show is going to be about. Our listeners know me personally. They know I have been on shows in an anxiety attack. I have been on shows in full trauma about something. I have had my guests in trauma on a show. My voice changes. They know that I'm going through whatever I'm going through, and I'm doing a show anyway, and my guests are doing a show anyway, and my regular co-hosts are going through whatever they're going through. And so it lends people to care. Is Kristen going to get over this? Or how is she going to be next week? How are we going to see her in 2 months that she survived that horrible relationship? And what revelations did I have? And what ways do I come in and blame myself for everything, or realize, well, wait a minute, I'm relatable. That's what I'm trying to get to. And so people want to hear that. And the proudest moment for me last week was when our marketing person said, hey, you know what? Your Facebook audience and your podcast audience is 50-50 male and female. We used to be 75-25. We are 50-50 across the board. I am so proud of that, especially because I have a son. That's amazing, because usually you don't get that, because we are heavily women, not, our hosts tend to be more female. So that was an inspiring moment for us.
That's you getting over the Oprah bump. I'm just going to say.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. We're really only into about 7 minutes before we do final thoughts. Like I told you, Kris, the hour just flies. So first of all, someone wanted to ask a little bit about your equipment, and then tips on building audience when we're starting into video heavy platforms. And so I would love for you to talk about equipment, and I would love for you and Kris Maxwell to explain why the podcast is so dominant even in the middle of video heavy live streaming. So equipment first.
Okay. People think that it requires $50,000 worth of equipment. Nope. Sorry, Best Buy, Amazon, whatever. Seriously, buy a decent set of non-wireless, a wired headset. They just work better. You get a Bluetooth in there and things get wonky. So I prefer old school, have it wired in. A Yeti microphone. Those suckers, I have 5 of them. They travel with me everywhere. And a laptop. There is a free program called Audacity that you can download and use on a Mac or Windows computer, where you can record shows that you're sitting next to someone. Or, we use GoToMeeting for our shows, and people, log in with their own headset and mic or a phone, and we just record those because we can afford editors now. So we're talking minimal expense to set up and be able to do a podcast in terms of the hardware and software.
I'm thinking that the really valuable piece is just sort of practice doing it. Like what Maxwell over there, and he might want to jump on, he has gotten a method down for doing our sizzle reels, which he's tremendous about distilling our episodes down into just a couple of minutes for folks who might not want to invest the full 60 minutes. Maxwell, could you talk a little bit about the method for doing that? And can you talk a little bit about why people are listening to podcasts? Because you're my pusher.
Yeah. So first of all, I think one of the biggest things that we've talked about so far tonight and that Kristen's really highlighted is the power of vulnerability. And when you put it in a format where it's vocal, and I've always kind of described when somebody says what's a podcast, I've always kind of described it as a really traditional format of storytelling. So if you think about people sitting around a fire talking about things, it's the oral experience. There's just so much that you can do in that oral experience. Sorry, April. But it does. There's some nostalgia to it. There's some. All right, now April's giving me shit.
I'm sorry. I feel like I should have 70s music.
Yeah. That's a different podcast.
But
Look, wait, intimacy is not a dirty word, and I want to make that abundantly clear. On this show, we embrace intimacy, and we don't make fun of it, and we don't have sexual innuendo around it, boys and girls.
Yes, we do.
Men and women, ladies and gents.
So.
Anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, so there's that piece, right? There's the oral storytelling part, but there's also the component of that intimacy. I mean, honestly, if we want to talk about intimacy, you're right next to this person, like you said, Kristen. You're experiencing the podcast as it's happening. I mean, you have to go back and edit it and all that kind of stuff. But there is that closeness to the people who are doing these podcasts. If it's a long-standing podcast, it's just like any other set of entertainment or educational experiences where you talk to these people or you listen to these people repeatedly over and over and over for weeks and weeks and weeks. You build this connection with them. So there's that piece. I think the other piece about podcasting that really just makes it so beneficial is that it's not set in the same realm as listening to a song when you want to listen to a good song. You know what you're going to get. There's a level of consistency to a good podcast. And so when you are on a road trip, or if you're mowing the lawn and you don't want to listen to the new Taylor Swift, I'm so old. Do people still like Taylor Swift?
Tay-Tay is still very big. Tay-Tay's very big.
Bill Schmitz is in the next room, and he is a big fan. I'm just telling you. Anyway, keep going, Max.
So yeah, there's just a different element. I just heard Bill. There's a different element to using that audio only platform, because you can do other things to it, but there's also just that that stronger connection, I think. And like Rudy Caceres was the one who asked about marketing podcasts during a time when algorithms are so heavy on pushing this video and on things like Facebook or even Twitter for some part. How do you manage to still separate the two? But I think when you're scrolling through your Facebook feed, and we do this multiple times, dozens of times a day, where we're just scrolling through, and we see so many different videos, and a lot of people watch them, and a lot of people watch 30 seconds and then don't watch the other, 4 minutes or whatever. We just get that all day, every day. But when we can pull ourselves away and sit down in a chair or on the way home from work, we can still have this experience happening that's so separated and so disconnected from the everyday, all day kind of element.
Yeah, we are visually assaulted all day long, assaulted and insulted all day long. That the ability to go to a quiet place, you can't watch a YouTube video while you're driving your car. It's just so much. And when we're talking about mental health, it's so personal. It's so very private. I think for me, it feels like seeing a face all the time around that takes away from that, like how I feel when I'm in a therapist's chair and I'm in my little bubble and it's just all about, my voice, their voice, kind of like a guided, meditation where you close your eyes and you are just in that world. that's what I feel like you get with a podcast, where a camera in there can almost take away from that experience.
I think that's really well put. I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is the different impacts of different sensory inputs, right? And one of the things that's happening right now, and my friends in the news media are freaking out. There's this big switch to video, right? They're getting away from even online writing, and we're switching to an all video format. And I don't like that. And for me, there's something about having the visual and the sound all blasting in your face that depersonalizes the whole experience. Yes. And you really hit on something that I really like about podcasts. One, the convenience, okay? I can do other things while I'm listening to the podcast. But also, I develop a much deeper relationship with the content in a podcast, right? There's something very intimate about this auditory, this story being told. And I think that's really it, isn't it? That we grew up, we evolved with this oral story tradition. And I think the podcast really gets in that. And it brings my focus in a much higher level than just about any other activity I do. And I know when I've got a good podcast, if I get distracted by something, if it's a bad podcast, I don't care. I just keep going. But if I'm engaged, I've got to stop it, and I've got to go back, because I will not miss something, right? Because it's that important. And when I was listening to the podcast that you did with April in an airport, and it got really loud for a second, I just shut it down, because I wanted to really experience it. That's the kind of relationship. Yes. That's the kind of work that you're doing. You're creating a relationship between you and the interviewee and the audience, and it's incredibly engaging.
Well, I'll say this. We get so many listeners. This is what really hit it for me. Plus I just don't want to be on camera. So that's my own thing. I don't look like April. I don't.
None of us do. None of us do. None of us do.
There's camera makeup. Jeez, Louise, guys, stop it.
Well, I mean, my staff, Melissa and Melanie, I mean, they're like my supermodels that walk. In fact, I know we have a joke. If a male is really hitting on me, if we go to we meet them in person, if they hit on either one of them, they're like, he blew it. So that's a funny thing. But anyway, aside from that, if you're on an airplane, okay, and you are listening to something really serious, like about mental health or what have you, you want the privacy of not having it flashing on a screen so that other people around can see what it is that you're listening to. You really want that to be private. The only way that you can do that is if it is audio only. And so I say that too, because we have so many listeners that say, oh my gosh, Kristen, I'm listening to you in my closet or in my bathroom because I am in a psychologically or physically abusive relationship, and your show is preventing me from wanting to kill myself, or it's helping me figure out how to get out, and I'm in an unsafe place, but I can listen to your show every night and no one knows that I'm listening to it. They can't necessarily do that if they're watching it on screen.
We're here to final thoughts, amazingly, and the last couple minutes. I told you the hour would fly. My final thoughts are, the reason to listen to podcasts is it's easier for me to download and keep on my phone. It's easier for me to listen to and not worry about sucking my data dry. It's easier to listen to when I am driving or doing the yard work or getting ready in the morning. There's only so much time you want to stare at something, but we listen all the time. My final thoughts, podcasts are, if you have content and stories that you need to tell, this is a really, really good way to get started on that. And then I'm going to go hand it off to Bart.
So thank you, Kris. What a treat getting to meet you. You're doing amazing work. And I think one of the things, and I've already kind of said this a little bit, but I think you're really, really embracing the tradition of storytelling. And a good podcast tells a story, and not just the content, but there's an emotional resonance. And you're embracing, as Kris said, the vulnerability. And I think that's why you're getting this great mix, and getting men to listen to these programs, that it's attractive to them and appealing to them, is a major compliment to the work that you're doing. So thank you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Kris.
Kris, thank you for being on the show. But also, thank you for giving this platform and allowing this platform to exist in a way that makes it easy for people to share their experiences, to tell their stories, and to help people in this very intimate way. I appreciate everything that you do, and this is incredible. So thank you.
And the other Kris.
Is that me?
Yeah, I knew I said I wouldn't mess them up, and then I did all night. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts, tune in. I mean, there's the more podcasts that talk about mental health, whether you're on my network or somewhere else, please, I mean, the better, because then we can really do what we are all trying to do, which is eradicate around mental health. So those are my final thoughts. Plunge forward and doing your own podcast if you want to, or being a guest and sharing a story. Anyone can reach out to me and talk about their own experience on our show, because the more the better.
Yeah, we've got room for more podcasts. As long as mental illness is a taboo topic, we've got plenty of room to tell more stories. And Tony Wood, if you want to check in, everyone's asking where you are and if you're a real boy.
That's not true. That's not true. That's a bald mischaracterization.
Fake news. Fake news, April. Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Totally fake news. Final thoughts. You know, there's just so much there. We covered so much ground. Podcasts, important. Know how to do it. Don't overspend. Have listeners. We certainly don't overspend here at SPSM.
We're not guilty of that.
We are never, nothing too cheap, we always say. Good night, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, other Kris. And also that other, Bo Bart. Him too.
It's been another hour. Happy Labor Day weekend. You've got tomorrow off. And so we've got 10 podcast channels listed on our blog, spsmchat.com. These are some of what Kris Walker suggested as some first things that you might want to listen to. Go ahead and check that out. You can follow hashtag SPSM all week. We're going to have a curation of the Twitter tweets. We're going to have a curation of the tweets. It's going to include links to all the resources that we mentioned tonight. And you can reach out to Kris Walker at MHN Radio, right?
MHNR Network. Come on, Foreman. This is pre-show stuff. Come on.
Thank you so much for being with us. Everyone have a lovely night. Bye.
Happy Labor Day, everybody.
Peace out.